Shyam Benegal is among the most respected names in world cinema. He is a filmmaker who believes in cinema with a social cause and one who never compromises with his inner voice. His glorious career spans over more than 25 years, in which he has made over 1,400 advertising films, 65 documentary films, 25 feature films, and many television serials, including the epic Bharat Ek Coach. He won several national, international awards and critical acclaims for his outstanding work in film and television. It will be interesting to know about such a prolific personality. We pay tribute to this living legend through a series of 3 episodes highlighting his works and thoughts. He talks to Dilip Chitre, a noted poet, artist, and fellow line traveler, about his voyage in cinema. So, let us see our first episode, Making of the Director, in which Shyam Benegal speaks to us about his childhood influences over his personality as a filmmaker and describes his path to the world of cinema.
Shyam, it's a pleasure to meet you here in these circumstances. Both as a person who has been watching you since the mid-60s and our paths have often crossed, and I've with great interest watched your career, your filmmaking. And now the purpose of this interview is to use that advantage of having known you as a parallel line traveler to ask you questions in which a younger audience would be interested. And the first question that I would like to ask you is, I know half the answer, but I want you to fill in the other half, is how you came into filmmaking. Well, I think when you came to Bombay, you already had a latent desire to make films. And I think your career in advertising was merely a kind of a learning process. That was your film school, in fact, as I've seen. So, did you always plan to be or aim at being a filmmaker right from the start?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I wanted to be a filmmaker from the time I was very, very young. You see, it has a beginning in the sense that there are several influences that were at work when I was a child. I come from a very large family, the 10 children, and my parents had 10 children. My father was a still photographer. He also was an avid home movie maker. He had a 16mm camera, and he used to make films about his children. And the pattern in which he used to work was that when each new child came, he would follow the progress of that child until the next one came, and he lost interest in the earlier one, and it carried on like this. So you can imagine, we used to have reels and reels of film about us growing up. And and he was also a very avid sort of filmmaker of different things. Like, we were living in a cantonment, Secunderabad cantonment, and which meant that army parades, cavalry exercises, artillery exercises, all these things he used to film. And they became our essential staple entertainment when we were children. Added to that was the fact that just 2 minutes away from where we used to live was a cinema that belonged to the army. It was called the Garrison Cinema. And the Garrison Cinema used to have 2 changes every week of films. But of course, they mainly showed Hollywood films and an occasional film, Hindi film or Tamil or Telugu film or something like that. And this was on the way to where we used to go to our playground when we went as children to play, and also to where we went to swim. So it became natural, curiosity to go and see films there. Of course, since we weren't the kind of children who got pocket money, so it was very rare that we could actually pay for our tickets.
Yeah.
So the next thing was like in Cinema Paradiso, was to befriend the projectionist. And I would see every change of film there, ever since I was maybe 6 years old. Mm-hmm. And later when the projectionist changed, we drove a wedge into the door on one side, so we could watch the film that way. And so this interest grew. First, of course, like everybody's interest is usually stars and so on. Then slowly it grew to wanting to know who had made the film, which meant interest in directors grew. So although like every other child, my initial ambition, like most children, was to become an engine driver. But it changed soon enough to wanting to be a filmmaker. Yeah. And that ambition remained all the way through my school, college, everything. So you see, all these things had become more or less familiar to us. Film was not something exotic and far away. And all this was obviously being absorbed. And when I went into school, to the higher classes in school, by the time I was matriculating, my oldest brother, who had gone to settle in Calcutta, he was a great cineast. And he used to subscribe to what used to be in those days called the Penguin Film Review, which is the precursor of Sight and Sound magazine.
That's right.
And Penguin Film Reviews, he used to read and send them across. So I had developed a huge collection of Penguin Film Reviews. So one got even more seriously interested. Then it so happened that at the age of 12, I decided, because we had a fairly large house, so we used to have cousins and so on coming to spend summer vacations with us. So one particular summer vacation, which was when I was about 12, I decided that I was going to make a film myself. So I made a film called Chuttiyon Mein Maaj Mazak, which was a film about fun in holidays with other kids, and in which the storyline was very thin, but there was a storyline, like one of the kids gets lost and the whole group go searching for him and eventually find him. So, and it had lots of little tricks like, things going backwards, kids diving into pools but going back, trains going in reverse and so on. So these little tricks, but it was properly scripted, shot and edited as a silent film. Now, when that happened, then of course, but living in Hyderabad was a great disadvantage because there were no film schools, there was no FTII during that time. Also, if one had to be in films, one had to be close to where the film industries were, which was either in Bombay or Madras.
Yeah. You're talking of 1946, 47 now.
No, even after. I'm talking now of, yes, that of course, but now, when I made my film, it was about 46, 47. But what I'm saying is now, into 50s, early 50s,
that's right,
and middle 50s, there wasn't, because when I was in college, there wasn't anywhere where I could think of joining. Also, my parents couldn't have afforded to send me to a film school.
There was no film.
There was no film school, but even if there was, they wouldn't have been able to afford to send me. So I nurtured this ambition somewhere in the back of my mind, yet like any lower middle class person, decided to pursue some kind of a career that would give me a livelihood. So I did economics. And after doing MA in economics, I thought for a while that I might teach. But of course, the pull of this was very great, and something happened there, which I consider was a very important point in which a decision was made by me. That was when I had gone to the Inter-University Youth Festival with a play. There used to be Inter-University Youth Festivals in Delhi during that time, and I'd gone from my university taking a play. And there Nehru spoke. And he, in his speech, he was talking about mass communications. And he made a very interesting point about hidden persuaders, about subliminal messages. And that got me very, very interested. And I said, this is an area I never thought of. You know, in terms of persuasive abilities that people possess, even though you may not consciously see them as such. But there are other aspects to it. So when I heard that speech, I really mulled it over in my mind, and then made a decision that I was not going to remain in Hyderabad and do this business of lecturing in a college, but I would come to Bombay and seek a job in mass communications, which automatically meant advertising. And I had a certain facility with the language,
You became a copywriter first.
Yes, I became a copywriter.
And the first things you wrote connected with cinema were scripts for 1-minute films.
Yes, they were. And then, of course, being a copywriter, I carried on being a copywriter, but only for about 6 months, where I was only writing copy. But within 6 months of my being in Bombay, I joined Lintas. Lintas at that time had just started to make advertising films. So which meant automatically that I could script and direct films. So then writing scripts and directing became part of my work, just as much as writing copy was part of my work. Now, but that's where I learnt the essential craft of filmmaking. I learnt how to write scripts, I learnt how to direct films, I learnt how to direct actors, I learnt how to use the camera, I learnt about lenses, I learned about laboratories, recording, editing, the whole works. And that was very good training ground for me, because, you know, it allowed me a period of time when I could really feel confident about making films. But it wasn't too long either. You know, of course, I made over 1,400 advertising films, but that was not the main thing. After the first 3 years of my being in advertising and making advertising films, I got the opportunity to make documentaries. So then I was making slightly longer films, not just one.
I remember the one you made about a street urchin.
Yes, yes.
And that was your most impressive sort of documentary.
Child of the Streets.
That and the Bastar one, which you did 2 years later.
Yes, about the same time. They were all done within the year. Then there was one on youth also. It was 1967. It was 20 years from the time of independence. So
Child of the Streets was very remarkable for its photography, basically for the use of incidental sound, because it's mostly shot on railway platforms and
streets of
Bombay, and it has a texture which is breathtaking. I mean, some of the things I would compare with Los Olvidados, you know, which is in that genre a tremendous thing.
Yes. So anyway, that was what was I got to do those things. But you see, I was also succeeding in advertising, and which meant that I was climbing up the ladder. And which was being successful in advertising meant that it could also be demotivating to me in wanting to be a filmmaker.
That's right.
I could continue happily to make advertising films, maybe a few documentaries now and again. I came up to a point where my next step was to head the agency. But fortunately, what happened at that time was that I applied for a Homi Bhabha fellowship, which I got. Having got a Homi Bhabha fellowship, which was essentially to do with cinema and particularly children's educational programming, both for television as well as films, gave me 2 years to think about which direction I was going to go. And it is then that I made up my mind that enough was enough. I had to give up advertising, and I would have to now think in terms of being an independent filmmaker. All this time, of course, I already was carrying a script under my arm. Since college, when I was in college, I had written a short story which was based on a real incident, which I was witness to. And then I had done several drafts of the script. And while I was in advertising, I had gone around to various producers in Bombay hoping to interest them in this subject. Yeah. None of them were. So I wasn't going to give up, of course. So I kept redoing the script over and over again. And fortunately, because of my advertising connections, I met up with a gentleman called Mohan Bijlani, who used to run
Blaze.
Yeah, Blaze, they used to run the largest advertising film distribution company in the country, which meant that they had contact with over 2,000 to 3,000 cinemas in all of the country. He offered to put some money into the making of this film. And when he discovered that it wasn't going to cost very much money, he said, fine. So I took a rain check on it and finished my fellowship. The moment I finished my fellowship, I smoothly went into the production of the film. So
You're talking of Ankur now?
Yes, Ankur. So there was no trauma involved, because otherwise, if I didn't have anything after the fellowship, it is possible that I would have probably been very worried and gone back into advertising. Yeah. Because by this time I was married, I had a daughter and so on. So I decided that I was going to go straight into this filmmaking. Once I went in there, of course, I've never looked back.
That was Making of the Director. We saw how Shyam Benegal entered the world of cinema. In our second episode, we will know more about him and his films. Until then, goodbye.